The House Ethics Committee. They spent months investigating the We Charity controversy, focusing on the Trudeau family's connections to the charity. And today they were releasing that report. You heard some hard words there that, the We scandal was politically driven, that normal checks and balances were not done simply because of those political connections. CBC's Janice McGregor can take us further into all of that. She's been listening in live from our nation's capital. It's a story you and I talked about when, of course, it was breaking and all the reaction afterwards. Now, months later, there's this report, even after the ethics commissioner came out with his report and said, there was no conflict of interest on Trudeau's part, but of course, we know what happened with the former finance minister, Bill Morneau. Janice.
Yeah, I was looking at my notes, so Hannah, almost a year ago that the Canada Student Service Grant and its relationship with We Charity was announced. So this has been with all of us for a long time here. But the recommendations in this report from the committee, if you can kind of cut through all the partisan stuff, and there is a lot of partisan stuff in this report. The Liberals, the Conservatives have kind of tacked on their own appendices at the end. And certainly in the remarks from the members of the committee there, you did hear the kind of back and forth that has characterized this probe over months, at times descending into filibuster. We remember all the requests for documents at not only this committee, but other committees as well. Acrimonious to say the least. But you know what? The end result here, some tangible recommendations, Suhana, that go over basically the things that were at the heart of what was wrong with this situation. We now have recommendations that there be a mandatory ethics screen prior to cabinet decisions, so that if you have another cabinet minister, as Mr. Morneau, for example, who was friends with the person who ultimately was the founder of an organization that was getting a contribution agreement worth $43 million with this government, that maybe some of this could have been disclosed. We know in the end, sort of both Mr. Morneau and Mr. Trudeau said they should have recused themselves from more decision making. This report goes into kind of some mandatory rules that should be in place, perhaps, to make sure that people sitting around the table don't have friendships or other kind of relationships in their life that would call into question the integrity of the process of awarding that contribution agreement. Specifically, there are suggestions here about controlling the access to senior public office holders better, that when people are meeting with them, another staffer should be in the room taking notes and documenting. We know the issue here. Craig Kielburger was not a registered lobbyist, and yet he got meetings and was able to contact Bartosz Chagger, Bill Morneau directly to make his pitch for things he wanted We Charity to do with this government. Also, a lot of discussion in these recommendations about due diligence, about the fact that for this contribution agreement, they did not do things that would have been required through other government procurement in terms of looking at this organization's capacity to do a national program, which included services for francophones, for example, or another kind of basic aspect, which was the fact that the way it was organized, it was shielding itself from liability. That puts more liability on taxpayers. And, also discussion in this report about the fact the way it was set up, it could have violated labor laws because of the way it was treating the volunteer hours that the students were doing. So there's a lot of really tangible stuff in here, Suhana, including recommendations that could be made to change Lobbying Act rules, conflict of interest rules, and tighten things up so that in the future, when the conflict of interest commissioner is reviewing a situation like this, he is able to sanction things that have the appearance of a conflict of interest. If you remember Mario Dion's report, part of the reason why he couldn't kind of come down on the prime minister was that he didn't find an actual conflict of interest, just the appearance of one. Committee members suggesting, you know what? You have to not have the appearance of a conflict of interest either, and they'd like those rules reviewed and tightened up. So there's a lot of material stuff in here. It's only about 8 pages, the recommendations, if you want to look it up. As lessons learned, there are some good ones, some good suggestions here, Suhana. So I commend that to everyone's reading.
Thanks for that, Janice, and for taking us through it. That's CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa.